The gunshot echoed through the humid Georgia night, and Priscilla Morgan knew she had exactly 3 minutes before they realized she had witnessed everything through the saloon window. Delta, Georgia in the summer of 1883 was not the kind of place where a woman could run freely without questions being asked, but Priscilla had no choice. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she pressed herself against the rough wooden siding of the general store, her emerald dress torn at the hem from catching on a fence post. The streets were mostly empty at this late hour, save for a few drunken ranch hands stumbling between establishments. She needed to disappear, and she needed to do it now. The Morrison Gang controlled most of Delta's underground dealings, and what she had just seen through that window would get her killed if they knew. 3 men standing over a body, the marshal's deputy with his badge glinting in the lamplight before one of them pocketed it. She had been walking back from delivering herbs to Mrs. Patterson's sick daughter when she heard the raised voices, and foolishly, she had looked. Priscilla's hands trembled as she ducked into the narrow alley between the general store and the blacksmith shop. Her mind raced through her limited options. She could not go to the marshal because half his men were likely involved. She could not go home because that would be the first place they would look. Her parents had died 2 years ago from cholera, leaving her alone in this world with nothing but the small apothecary shop they had built together. The sound of heavy boots on the wooden walkway made her freeze. 2 men were talking in low voices, their shadows stretching long across the dirt street illuminated by the moon overhead. "You sure someone was watching?" one voice said gruffly. "Thought I saw something move past the window." "Could have been nothing, but Murphy wants us to check it out," the second voice replied. Priscilla held her breath, pressing herself deeper into the shadows. A rat scurried past her feet, and she bit her lip to keep from gasping. The men moved closer, their footsteps deliberate and searching. She needed to move to run, but her legs felt like lead weights. Then she heard it, the soft whinny of a horse and the gentle creak of leather. Someone else was in this alley, and she had been so focused on the men in the street that she had not noticed. "Easy girl," a deep male voice whispered, barely audible. "Something's got you spooked." Priscilla turned slowly, her eyes adjusting to the deeper darkness of the alley. A tall figure stood beside a paint horse, his hand stroking the animal's neck in a calming gesture. The horse had sensed her presence, even if the man had not yet. She had 2 choices: stay hidden and hope the men in the street did not find her, or reveal herself to this stranger and pray he was not one of them. The decision was made for her when one of the men in the street called out, "Check that alley between the shops." Without thinking, Priscilla stumbled forward, her hands outstretched in the darkness. She collided with something solid and warm, and strong hands caught her arms to steady her. "Please," she whispered urgently, her voice barely a breath. "Please, they cannot find me." The man said nothing for a long moment, but she could feel his eyes on her face, studying her even in the dim light. Then, with a movement so quick and fluid it took her breath away, he lifted her onto his horse and swung up behind her. "Hold on tight and do not make a sound," he murmured against her ear, his breath warm on her neck. The horse moved forward with surprising silence for such a large animal, emerging from the back of the alley into another narrow passage between buildings that Priscilla had not known existed. The man guided the horse with subtle pressure from his legs, keeping one arm firmly around Priscilla's waist to hold her steady. She could hear the men behind them, their voices growing more agitated as they searched the empty alley. They rode through a maze of back paths and forgotten spaces between Delta's buildings until they reached the edge of town. The man did not slow down until they were well into the pine forest that bordered the settlement, following what looked like an old hunting trail. Priscilla's heart was still racing, but now it was not just from fear. She was acutely aware of the stranger's arm around her, the solid warmth of his chest against her back, and the steady rhythm of his breathing. She knew she should be terrified, riding off into the night with a man she had never met, but something in his gentle handling of both her and his horse told her she was safer here than she had been in town. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 20 minutes, the man slowed his horse to a walk and then to a stop in a small clearing beside a creek. The moonlight filtered through the pine branches overhead, creating patterns of silver light on the ground. He dismounted first, then reached up to help her down. Priscilla's legs were shaky when her feet touched solid ground, and she wobbled slightly. His hands stayed on her waist until she steadied herself. "Thank you," she managed to say, her voice hoarse from the fear that was only now beginning to subside. "I do not know what would have happened if you had not been there. You want to tell me why Murphy Morrison's men were hunting you through the streets of Delta at midnight?" His voice was calm, not accusatory, but genuinely curious. Priscilla looked up at him properly for the first time. The moonlight revealed a man in his mid-20s with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes that appeared gray in this light, but might have been blue or green in daylight. He had the lean, muscular build of someone who spent his days doing hard physical work, and he wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy: worn denim pants, a simple cotton shirt, and a leather vest. A hat hung down his back from a cord around his neck. "I saw something I should not have seen," she said carefully, unsure how much to reveal. "Something that could get people killed." He studied her face for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "And now they will be looking for you." "Yes." The word came out as barely a whisper as the full reality of her situation settled over her like a heavy blanket. She could not go home. She could not go back to her shop. Everything she had worked for, everything her parents had left her, was now beyond her reach. The man seemed to read her thoughts on her face. "You have family, someone who could hide you." Priscilla shook her head. "My parents died 2 years ago. I have no siblings, no close relatives in Delta. There is no one. Friends." She thought of the few people she considered friends in town, the women who came to her shop for remedies and tonics, the men who tipped their hats when she passed. But none of them would risk crossing the Morrison Gang for her. None of them would hide her if Murphy came asking questions. "No one who would go against Murphy Morrison," she admitted. The man was quiet again, and Priscilla found herself studying him as he appeared to think through the situation. There was something solid and dependable about him, something that made her instinctively trust him, despite knowing nothing about who he was or where he had come from. "I am Bennett Fletcher," he finally said, offering his hand in a formal gesture that seemed oddly polite given their circumstances. "I have a ranch about 15 miles north of here, up in the hills. It is not much, but it is mine, and Murphy Morrison has no reason to look for anyone there." Priscilla took his hand, feeling the calluses that spoke of hard work and long hours. "Priscilla Morgan. I run the apothecary in town, or at least I did until tonight. Miss Morgan, I am going to be straight with you because I figure you have earned some honesty tonight. If Murphy is looking for you, he will not stop until he finds you or until he thinks you are dead. You cannot go back to town, not anytime soon, maybe not ever if what you saw was bad enough." The words hurt even though she had already known them to be true. "I understand. You can come to my ranch. I can keep you safe there while we figure out what to do. But I need to know what you saw, Miss Morgan. I need to know what we are dealing with." This was the moment of decision. Priscilla looked into Bennett Fletcher's eyes and saw nothing but genuine concern and determination. She had trusted her instincts when she had asked him for help in that alley, and those same instincts were telling her now that she could trust him with the secret that had turned her life upside down. "I saw them kill Deputy Henderson," she said quietly, "in the back room of the Silver Star Saloon. 3 men, all of them wearing Morrison Gang rings. And I saw the marshal there too, standing in the doorway. He did not try to stop them. He just watched." Bennett's jaw tightened and a muscle twitched in his cheek. "You are certain it was Henderson?" "I have known Robert Henderson since I was a child. It was him." "And you are sure about the marshal?" Priscilla nodded. "He turned toward the window just as I was backing away. For a moment I thought he saw me, but then one of the other men said something and he looked away. But it was definitely Marshal Cooper." Bennett let out a long, slow breath and ran his hand through his hair. "That is worse than I thought. Henderson was investigating something. Word around the ranches was that he had found evidence of cattle rustling and land fraud. If they killed him and the marshal did nothing, that means the corruption goes deeper than anyone suspected. What am I going to do?" Priscilla felt the tears she had been holding back start to burn behind her eyes. "Everything I have is in that town. My home, my business, my entire life." Bennett stepped closer, and without hesitation, he placed both hands gently on her shoulders. The gesture was comforting rather than presumptuous, grounding her when she felt like she might float away on a current of panic. "Right now, you are going to come with me to my ranch. You are going to sleep in a real bed and eat a proper meal. Tomorrow, when the sun is up and we can both think clearly, we will figure out the next steps. But tonight, Miss Morgan, you just need to survive. And I promise you, I will make sure you do." The tears spilled over then, and Priscilla found herself crying in a way she had not allowed herself to cry since her parents had died. Bennett pulled her gently against his chest, one hand cradling the back of her head, while the other held her steady. He did not say anything, did not try to shush her or tell her everything would be all right. He just held her while she cried out the fear and grief and overwhelming uncertainty of the past hour. When the tears finally subsided, Priscilla pulled back, embarrassed by her display. "I am sorry. I should not have." "You have nothing to apologize for," Bennett said firmly. "You have been through something traumatic tonight. Tears are a reasonable response." He handed her a clean handkerchief from his pocket, and Priscilla wiped her eyes, grateful for the kindness of this stranger who had already saved her life once tonight. "We should keep moving," Bennett said after giving her a moment to compose herself. "I do not think they followed us, but I would rather get you somewhere secure before daybreak." He helped her back onto the horse, and this time when he settled behind her, Priscilla felt herself relax slightly into his steady presence. They rode through the forest in comfortable silence, the only sounds being the gentle rhythm of the horses' hooves on the soft ground and the night sounds of crickets and owls. The moon was beginning to sink toward the horizon when they finally emerged from the forest into a valley nestled between rolling hills. A small ranch house sat in the center of cleared land, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. It was modest but well-maintained, and Priscilla could see even in the darkness that Bennett took pride in his property. "It is not fancy," Bennett said as he helped her down from the horse, "but it is solid and safe. The nearest neighbor is 5 miles east, and they mind their own business." "It is perfect," Priscilla said honestly. After the chaos of the evening, the quiet isolation of this place felt like a sanctuary. Bennett led her to the house while his horse followed behind like a faithful dog. Inside, he lit a lamp, and Priscilla looked around the single large room that served as kitchen, dining area, and living space. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and simple but sturdy furniture filled the space. Everything was clean and organized, speaking to the character of the man who lived here. "The bedroom is through there," Bennett said, gesturing to a door on the far wall. You will sleep there tonight. I will take the couch out here." "I cannot take your bed," Priscilla protested. "You have already done so much for me. Miss Morgan, you have been through an ordeal tonight. You need proper rest. I will not hear any arguments about it." His tone was gentle but firm, and Priscilla found herself nodding in agreement. He showed her the bedroom, which contained a large bed covered in a colorful quilt, a dresser, and a washstand. It was simple but comfortable, and Priscilla felt exhaustion washing over her now that she was finally somewhere safe. "There is water in the pitcher and clean towels in the dresser," Bennett said. "If you need anything during the night, just call out. I will hear you." "Mr. Fletcher," Priscilla said as he turned to leave, "thank you for everything. I know you did not have to help me, but you did, and I will never forget it." Bennett paused in the doorway and looked back at her. In the lamplight, his eyes were definitely blue, she realized, a deep blue like the sky just before full dark. "Get some rest, Miss Morgan. Things will look clearer in the morning." After he left, closing the door softly behind him, Priscilla sank down onto the bed. She was still wearing her torn green dress, and she realized she had nothing else to wear. But that seemed like a minor problem compared to everything else. She washed her face and hands in the basin, then lay down on top of the quilt, too tired to do more than slip off her shoes. Sleep came quickly despite everything, and Priscilla dreamed of riding through endless forests with strong arms holding her safe. Morning light streaming through the window woke Priscilla, and for a moment she could not remember where she was. Then it all came rushing back: the murder, the chase, Bennett Fletcher. She sat up quickly, her heart racing, but the sounds of someone moving around in the other room reassured her. She smoothed her dress as best she could and ventured out of the bedroom. Bennett was at the stove, cooking something that smelled absolutely wonderful. He had changed into a fresh shirt and had clearly washed up, his dark hair still slightly damp. "Good morning," he said, turning to smile at her. "I hope you like eggs and bacon. It is about all I know how to cook well." "It smells amazing," Priscilla said honestly. Her stomach growled, reminding her that she had not eaten since lunch the previous day. Bennett set 2 plates on the simple wooden table and gestured for her to sit. The meal was hearty and delicious, and they ate in companionable silence for a few minutes before Bennett spoke. "I have been thinking about your situation," he said carefully. "Murphy Morrison is not going to give up looking for you. But he is also not going to want to draw too much attention to why he is looking. If you are supposedly missing, that is one thing. If you turn up dead, that starts raising questions. So what are you suggesting?" "I think we need to make Murphy believe you left town. Maybe that you went to Atlanta to stay with family, or that you took a stage west to start over somewhere new. Something that explains why you are gone but does not make him think you are hiding somewhere nearby." Priscilla considered this. "But he will check. He will send people to Atlanta or wherever we say I went. When they do not find me, he will know I lied. By then, enough time will have passed that the trail will be cold, and more importantly, we will have had time to figure out how to use what you know against him. Use it against him. How?" Bennett leaned forward, his expression serious. "Henderson was investigating something that got him killed. If we can find out what he knew and get that information to the right people, people outside of Delta who are not in Murphy's pocket, then we can bring him down. And once he is in jail or on the run, you can come out of hiding safely." "That could take months," Priscilla said, though she knew he was right. "Maybe. But what other choice do we have?" Priscilla looked at this man who had risked his own safety to help her, who was now offering to let her hide in his home for however long it took to resolve this mess. "Why are you doing this? You do not know me. You had no reason to help me last night, and you certainly have no obligation to keep helping me now." Bennett was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes studying her face. "My father was murdered by the Morrison Gang 5 years ago," he finally said. "They wanted his land, this land, and when he would not sell, they killed him and made it look like an accident. I could never prove it, but I know it was them. I know what Murphy Morrison is capable of, and I know what it feels like to be helpless against him." "I am so sorry," Priscilla said softly. "I have wanted to bring Murphy down for years, but I never had the evidence or the means. Now maybe I do. You saw them commit murder. You can identify the men. That is powerful, Miss Morgan. That could be the thing that finally puts an end to Murphy's reign over Delta. But it puts you at risk too. If Murphy finds out you are hiding me, I can handle Murphy Morrison," Bennett said with quiet confidence. "This is my land, and I know every inch of it. They will not find you here unless I want them to." Priscilla felt something warm bloom in her chest as she looked at this man who had appeared in her darkest moment, like an answer to a prayer she had not known how to voice. He was strong and capable, but more than that, he was good. She could see it in the way he spoke, in the way he had cared for her without expecting anything in return. "Then I suppose I should stop calling you Mr. Fletcher if we are going to be living under the same roof for a while," she said, trying to lighten the heavy mood. "And you should call me Priscilla." Bennett's face broke into a genuine smile, and Priscilla felt her heart skip slightly at the transformation it created. "Bennett, then. And I am glad to have you here, Priscilla, even if the circumstances are not ideal." Over the next few days, they fell into a routine. Bennett would ride out each morning to tend to his cattle and horses, while Priscilla took care of the house. She discovered that while Bennett was a capable cook of basic meals, he had been living as a bachelor for years, and his home showed it. She organized his kitchen, mended clothes that had been sitting in a basket for months, and started a small herb garden near the back door. In the evenings, they would sit together and talk. Bennett told her about his life, how he had worked as a ranch hand for years after his father's death, saving every penny until he could buy back the land that should have been his inheritance. Priscilla shared stories about her parents, about learning the healing arts from her mother, and the business side of running an apothecary from her father. A week after her arrival, Bennett rode into town on market day when he knew the streets would be crowded enough that he could gather information without drawing too much attention. He returned in the late afternoon with supplies and news. "Your shop is closed," he told her as they sat on the porch in the cooling evening air. "There is a sign that says you went to Atlanta to care for a sick aunt. Apparently, you left a note with Mrs. Patterson explaining everything." Priscilla's eyebrows rose. "I did no such thing." "I know. But Murphy wanted an explanation for your disappearance, so he created one. As far as the town is concerned, you left of your own accord and no one knows when you will be back. Did anyone seem suspicious? Not that I could tell. Murphy is controlling the narrative. Deputy Henderson's death has been ruled an accident, a bar fight gone wrong. His body was found in an alley, and the official story is that he was drunk and got into an altercation with some drifters who have since left town. Priscilla felt sick. So they are getting away with it. For now, Bennett said grimly. But I have been asking around carefully. It turns out Henderson was not just investigating cattle rustling. He was looking into a land grab scheme. Murphy and his associates have been using falsified documents to claim land from small ranchers and farmers, then selling it to railroad companies for huge profits. Henderson had found some of the fake documents and was building a case. You think those documents still exist? That is the question. If Henderson hid them somewhere before he was killed, they could be the evidence we need. But finding them will not be easy. They sat in silence for a while, watching the sun sink toward the horizon and paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. Priscilla was acutely aware of Bennett beside her, his presence steady and reassuring. "I have been thinking," she said slowly. "Before all this happened, I was content with my life. I had my shop and my routines, but I was not really living. I was just existing, going through the motions since my parents died." Bennett turned to look at her. "And now I feel more alive than I have in years, even though I am hiding for my life. Is that strange?" "No," Bennett said softly. "I understand what you mean. I have been so focused on just surviving and keeping this ranch going that I forgot what it felt like to have someone to share it with." Their eyes met, and Priscilla felt something shift between them, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been growing since that first night in the alley. Neither of them spoke the words, but they did not need to. It was there in the way Bennett looked at her, in the way her heart raced when he smiled. The moment was broken by the sound of a horse approaching fast. Bennett was on his feet instantly, his hand moving to the rifle he kept by the door. "Get inside," he said quietly but urgently. "Stay away from the windows." Priscilla obeyed, her heart pounding as she pressed herself against the wall next to the fireplace. Through the window, she could see a single rider approaching, pushing his horse hard. As the rider got closer, Bennett relaxed slightly. "It is all right," he called to her. "It is just Thomas." A few minutes later, a young man in his early 20s dismounted in front of the house. He was lean and weathered from outdoor work, with sandy hair and a worried expression. "Bennett, we have got a problem," he said without preamble. "Morrison's men have been going ranch to ranch, supposedly looking for rustlers, but they are asking questions about strangers, about whether anyone has seen a woman matching a description." "What description?" Bennett asked calmly, though Priscilla could hear the tension in his voice. "Mid-20s, dark hair, about 5.5 feet tall. They are not using her name, but they are definitely looking for someone specific." "Did they come to your place?" "Yesterday. My pa told them we had not seen anyone and they moved on. But Bennett, they are working their way through every ranch in the county. Eventually, they are going to come here." Priscilla stepped out from her hiding spot, unable to stay silent any longer. "Then I should leave. I should go somewhere far away where they will never find me and where I cannot put Bennett in danger." Both men turned to look at her. Thomas's eyes widened slightly in surprise at seeing a woman in Bennett's house, but he quickly recovered. "You must be the woman they are looking for," he said. "Thomas Parker, meet Priscilla Morgan," Bennett said. "She witnessed Murphy Morrison's men commit murder. Now Murphy wants to make sure she never talks about what she saw." Thomas let out a low whistle. "That explains why they are being so persistent." "But Miss Morgan, running now would be a mistake. If you leave, they will track you down. Your only advantage right now is that they do not know where you are." "Thomas is right," Bennett said. "And besides, I am not letting you face this alone. We are in this together now." The way he said it, with such absolute certainty, made Priscilla's chest tighten with emotion. She barely knew this man, yet he was willing to risk everything to keep her safe. "What do we do when they come here?" she asked. Bennett and Thomas exchanged glances. "We have a storm cellar," Bennett said. "It is well hidden and has provisions in case we need to use it for shelter during bad weather. If Morrison's men come calling, you can hide there while I deal with them." "And what will you tell them?" "The truth, mostly. That I am just a rancher trying to make a living. That I have not seen any strangers around. They have no reason to suspect me of hiding anyone." "Unless they search the house," Priscilla pointed out. "Then we will need to make sure there is no evidence you were ever here," Thomas said. "No women's clothing, no feminine items lying around, nothing that would make them suspicious." The three of them spent the next hour preparing. Priscilla gathered all her belongings and moved them to the storm cellar, which was accessed through a trapdoor in the barn floor, cleverly concealed beneath a layer of hay. The cellar was larger than Priscilla had expected, with shelves of canned goods, barrels of water, and even a small cot. "I built this after a bad tornado season a few years back," Bennett explained as he showed her around. "I wanted to make sure I had somewhere safe to wait out storms. I never thought I would be using it to hide someone from the Morrison Gang." "I am sorry for bringing this trouble to your door," Priscilla said quietly. Bennett caught her hand, his fingers warm and strong around hers. "You did not bring trouble. Murphy Morrison brought trouble when he decided he was above the law. You are just trying to survive, and I am honored to help you do that." The intensity in his eyes made Priscilla's breath catch. They were standing close in the dim light of the cellar, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. "Bennett," she whispered, not sure what she was asking for, but knowing she needed something more than just words. He lifted his free hand and gently cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing across her skin with infinite tenderness. "I know this is not how things are supposed to happen. We should have met properly, been able to court each other like normal people. But Priscilla, I need you to know that what I am feeling for you, it is not just about the circumstances. It is not just me wanting to protect you. It is more than that." "I feel it too," Priscilla admitted. "I have felt it since that first night when you pulled me onto your horse and rode me to safety. I know it is fast and I know it is complicated, but it is real." Bennett leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Priscilla did not want to pull away. She lifted her face to his, and when their lips met, it felt like coming home. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, but then deepened into something more passionate as they both gave in to the feelings they had been dancing around for days. When they finally pulled apart, both breathing heavily, Bennett rested his forehead against hers. "I will keep you safe," he promised. "Whatever it takes, I will keep you safe. And when this is all over, when Murphy is in prison, and you are free to live your life again, I am going to court you properly. I am going to take you to dances and on picnics and show you off to everyone in 3 counties." Priscilla laughed, a sound of pure joy that felt foreign after so many days of fear. "I would like that very much." They heard Thomas calling from outside and reluctantly separated. Bennett helped her back up out of the cellar, and they carefully concealed the entrance again before heading back to the house. Thomas was waiting on the porch, looking uncomfortable. "Sorry to interrupt whatever that was," he said with a knowing grin. "But I should get back before my pa starts wondering where I am. Bennett, if Morrison's men come to my place asking about you, what should I tell them? The truth. That I am your neighbor and we help each other out during busy seasons. Do not lie for me, Thomas. I do not want you or your family getting caught up in this mess." Thomas nodded. "All right. But if you need help, you know where to find me. My pa and I, we have no love for Murphy Morrison. He tried to buy our land last year using some pretty threatening tactics. We did not cave, but a lot of our neighbors did." After Thomas left, Bennett and Priscilla spent the evening making sure the house looked appropriately bachelor-like. They hid the herbs Priscilla had been drying in the kitchen, removed the curtains she had hung in the bedroom window, and generally undid all the homey touches she had added over the past week. "It is amazing how much difference a woman's touch makes to a place," Bennett said as they surveyed their work. "I did not realize how much better the house looked with you in it until we had to hide all the evidence. You should have seen my parents' house," Priscilla said with a smile. "My mother could not go a day without rearranging something or adding new decorations. She said a house should be a reflection of the people who live in it, full of life and love. She sounds like she was a wonderful woman. She was. They both were. I miss them every day. Bennett pulled her into his arms, and Priscilla allowed herself to relax into his embrace. This felt right in a way nothing else had since her parents died. Being here with Bennett, despite the danger and uncertainty, felt like finding a piece of herself she had not known was missing. That night, they both slept fitfully, listening for the sound of approaching riders. But the night passed quietly, and morning came with no sign of trouble. 2 days later, their luck ran out. Priscilla was in the garden behind the house, pulling weeds and checking on the herbs she had planted, when Bennett came running from the barn. "They are coming," he said urgently. "3 riders about a mile out. You need to get to the cellar now." Priscilla did not waste time asking questions. She dropped her basket and ran for the barn with Bennett right behind her. He pulled up the trapdoor and helped her down, then paused before closing it. "Remember, stay absolutely quiet no matter what you hear. Even if it sounds like they are tearing the place apart, do not come out until I give the all-clear signal. 3 knocks, pause, then 2 more knocks. That is the only way you will know it is safe." "Be careful," Priscilla said, her voice shaking slightly. "Always am." He gave her one quick, fierce kiss, then lowered the trapdoor, and she heard him covering it with hay in the darkness of the cellar. Priscilla could hear her own heartbeat thundering in her ears. She forced herself to breathe slowly and evenly, trying to stay calm. Bennett knew what he was doing. He could handle this. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. Then she heard it, the sound of horses arriving, of men's voices talking to Bennett. She could not make out the words, but she recognized the aggressive tone. These were men used to intimidating others, men who expected to get what they wanted through force and fear. Footsteps overhead made dust filter down from the barn ceiling. They were searching. Priscilla pressed herself into the corner of the cellar, making herself as small as possible even though she knew they could not see her through the floor. "You live out here all alone, Fletcher?" a rough voice asked, loud enough now that she could hear it clearly. "That is right," Bennett replied, his voice calm and unconcerned. "Just me and my cattle. Seems lonely. I like the quiet. You seen anyone passing through in the last couple weeks? Strangers? Maybe a woman traveling alone?" "Cannot say that I have." "Why is someone missing?" "That is our business, not yours. You sure you have not seen anyone?" "I am sure. Like I said, I keep to myself out here. Do not get many visitors." There was a long pause, and Priscilla held her breath. Then another voice spoke, this one slicker, more cultured. "You mind if we take a look around?" "Just to be thorough." "Feel free," Bennett said, and Priscilla could hear the confidence in his voice. "But I would appreciate it if you did not spook my horses. They are valuable animals and skittish around strangers." The men moved through the barn, and Priscilla could track their progress by their footsteps overhead. They were thorough, she would give them that. She heard them checking the stalls, moving equipment, even climbing into the loft. But they did not find the trapdoor. After what felt like hours but was probably only 10 minutes, the men moved to the house. Priscilla could no longer hear what was happening, and the silence was somehow worse than hearing them search. She tried not to think about what they might be doing, whether they would find something she and Bennett had missed in their cleaning. More time passed. Priscilla had no way to measure it in the darkness, but her legs were starting to cramp from holding herself so still and tense. She forced herself to relax slightly, to trust that Bennett would handle this. Finally, mercifully, she heard the sound of horses leaving. But she waited, counting her breaths and reminding herself that Bennett had said not to come out until she heard the signal. It could be a trick. The men might have pretended to leave while one stayed behind to watch. An eternity later she heard it. 3 knocks on the trapdoor, a pause, then 2 more knocks. Light flooded the cellar as Bennett pulled up the door, and Priscilla had to blink against the brightness. "Are you all right?" Bennett asked, reaching down to help her up. "Yes, I am fine. Did they believe you?" "I think so. They searched pretty thoroughly, but they did not find anything suspicious." He pulled her up and into his arms, holding her tightly. "I am sorry you had to go through that. I am sorry for all of this." "You have nothing to apologize for. You probably just saved my life again." Priscilla pulled back to look at his face. "What did they say? What were they looking for exactly?" "They did not give specifics, just asked if I had seen any strangers. But one of them, the one with the smooth voice, he looked at me like he was not entirely convinced. His name is Samuel Grant, and he is Murphy's right-hand man. Smart and dangerous, not like the usual thugs Murphy employs. You think he will come back? Maybe. We need to be more careful. No more working in the garden during the day when you could be spotted. No more lights in the bedroom at night that might be visible from a distance. If they are watching, we cannot give them any reason to be suspicious." Priscilla nodded, understanding the necessity even as her heart sank at the increased restrictions. "How long can we keep this up? How long before they either find me or give up looking?" "I do not know," Bennett admitted. "But I have been thinking about what Thomas said, about the land fraud case Henderson was investigating. If we could find that evidence, we could send it to the territorial authorities or even the federal marshals. Once Murphy is arrested, you would be safe to come out of hiding. But Henderson must have hidden those documents somewhere secure. How would we even begin to look for them?" "Henderson had a sister," Bennett said thoughtfully. "She lives in Savannah. Maybe he sent the documents to her for safekeeping, or maybe she knows where he might have hidden them." "You want to go to Savannah, not me, us. If we are going to do this, we are going to do it together. But that would mean leaving the ranch unguarded, and traveling together we would be more noticeable." "We would be more noticeable as a couple from Delta," Bennett corrected. "But as a married couple traveling from somewhere else, we would just be two more people on the road. No one would look twice at us." The word married hung in the air between them, loaded with implications. Priscilla felt her cheeks heat up, but she forced herself to think practically about the plan. "It could work," she said slowly. "But it is risky. If Murphy has people watching the roads, we would not take the main roads. I know back trails and lesser-used routes. It would take longer, but it would be safer." Bennett paused, then added, "There is something else to consider. If we are going to travel as a married couple, we should probably make it legal. Not just for appearances, but because if anything happens to me, I want to make sure this ranch and everything I have goes to you, not to some distant cousin I have never met." Priscilla stared at him, not sure she had heard correctly. "Are you asking me to marry you?" "I suppose I am, though this is not how I imagined doing it." Bennett took her hands in his expression serious. "I know it is fast. I know the circumstances are not ideal, but Priscilla, I meant what I said before. What I feel for you is real. When this is all over, I would want to marry you anyway. So why not make it official now when it also serves a practical purpose?" "That is possibly the least romantic proposal in history," Priscilla said, but she was smiling despite herself. "You are right. Let me try again." Bennett dropped to one knee, still holding her hands. "Priscilla Morgan, you walked into my life during one of your darkest moments, and somehow you brought light with you. You have made this house feel like a home again. You have reminded me what it feels like to care about something beyond just surviving day to day. I want to wake up next to you every morning and fall asleep beside you every night. I want to build a life with you, raise a family with you, grow old with you. So will you marry me? Not because it is practical or convenient, but because I love you and I cannot imagine my future without you in it." Priscilla felt tears streaming down her face, but these were happy tears, joyful tears. "Yes," she whispered. Yes, I will marry you." Bennett stood and swept her into his arms, spinning her around in a circle while she laughed with pure delight. When he set her down, he kissed her thoroughly, pouring all his emotions into the gesture. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless and grinning. "So how do we do this?" Priscilla asked. "We cannot exactly go back to Delta and have a ceremony. There is a small town about 20 miles west of here called Riverside. It is barely more than a crossroads, but it has a justice of the peace. We could ride there tomorrow, get married, and be back before anyone even notices we are gone." "What about witnesses? Do we not need witnesses?" "The justice usually asks a couple of locals to stand in if needed. It is not fancy, but it is legal." Priscilla thought about her mother, who had always dreamed of seeing her daughter married in a beautiful ceremony with all their friends and family present. She thought about the wedding she had imagined as a girl, with a white dress and flowers and all the traditional trappings. But then she looked at Bennett, at this good, honest man who had risked everything to keep her safe, and realized that none of those things mattered. What mattered was the commitment, the choice to build a life together regardless of what the future held. "Tomorrow sounds perfect," she said. They left before dawn the next morning, taking back trails that wound through forested hills and across streams. Bennett had packed supplies for the journey, including a dress he had bought months ago in a moment of optimism, thinking he might someday find a woman to give it to. It was simple blue cotton, nothing fancy, but when Priscilla held it up, she thought it was the most beautiful dress she had ever seen. They reached Riverside around midday. True to Bennett's description, it was barely more than a handful of buildings clustered around a crossroads. But it had a general store, a small church, and a house with a sign identifying it as belonging to Justice of the Peace Harold Wilson. Justice Wilson was a portly man in his 60s with kind eyes and a warm smile. He did not ask any questions about why they wanted to marry so quickly, or why they had come to his small town, instead of marrying wherever they came from. He simply asked if they were both entering the marriage freely and of their own will, had them sign the necessary papers, and called in his wife and the shopkeeper from next door to serve as witnesses. The ceremony itself lasted less than 10 minutes, but Priscilla knew she would remember every moment of it for the rest of her life. The way Bennett's hand trembled slightly as he slipped a simple gold band onto her finger. The steadiness of his voice as he promised to love and cherish her for the rest of their days. The feeling of absolute rightness when Justice Wilson pronounced them husband and wife. "You may kiss your bride," Justice Wilson said with a smile. Bennett did not need to be told twice. He pulled Priscilla into his arms and kissed her with a tenderness that made her heart overflow with joy. When they broke apart, Mrs. Wilson was dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. "Congratulations to you both," she said warmly. "I hope you will be very happy together." They spent the night at a small boarding house in Riverside, and for the first time, Priscilla and Bennett were truly alone as husband and wife. The room was simple but clean, and after the landlady brought them a supper tray, they finally had the privacy to fully acknowledge what had just happened. "I cannot believe we did that," Priscilla said, looking at the ring on her finger. "We are married." "Do you regret it?" Bennett asked, though she could hear the uncertainty in his voice. "Not for a single second. Do you? Marrying you is the best decision I have ever made." He crossed the room to where she stood by the window and wrapped his arms around her from behind, resting his chin on top of her head. "I just wish I could have given you the wedding you deserved. A real celebration with family and friends and all the traditional things." "We have the only thing that matters," Priscilla said, turning in his arms to face him. "We have each other. Everything else is just decoration." That night, they consummated their marriage with a tenderness and passion that left them both breathless and clinging to each other. Afterward, lying in Bennett's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Priscilla felt a peace she had not experienced since before her parents died. Despite everything that had happened, despite the danger still lurking and the uncertain future, she was exactly where she was meant to be. "I love you," she whispered into the darkness. "I love you too," Bennett replied, his arms tightening around her. "Always." They returned to the ranch the next day, and life settled into a new rhythm. Priscilla was no longer just hiding at the ranch, she was building a home there with her husband. They made plans for the trip to Savannah, carefully preparing their story and their route. But they also talked about the future beyond the immediate crisis, about expanding the herd, about adding a room onto the house for the children they hoped to have someday. A week after their wedding, Thomas came riding up to the ranch again. This time, his news was even more urgent. "Bennett, Murphy has posted a reward," he said breathlessly. $500 for information leading to the whereabouts of Priscilla Morgan. That is more money than most folks around here see in a year. People are going to start looking hard for that kind of money. Bennett and Priscilla exchanged worried glances. They had known Murphy would not give up easily, but a reward changed everything. It would motivate people who otherwise would have no interest in helping the Morrison Gang. "Did the poster give a description?" Priscilla asked. "Yes, and it is detailed. Eye color, height, distinguishing marks. Someone who knew you well must have provided the information. Or Murphy searched my house thoroughly and found a photograph," Priscilla said. Her parents had paid for a formal photograph of her on her 21st birthday, and it had hung in their living room, which had become her living room after they died. "We need to accelerate our timeline," Bennett said. "We need to get to Savannah and find those documents before someone gets lucky and spots Priscilla." "I can come with you," Thomas offered. "Extra protection on the road." Bennett considered this. "Would your father be able to manage the ranch alone if you left for a few weeks?" "He would manage. And honestly, he would probably insist on it if he knew what was going on. My pa thinks Murphy Morrison is a plague on this county, and he would do anything to help bring him down." "Then we leave tomorrow," Bennett decided. "Priscilla and I will travel as a married couple, which we are now, so that part of the story will be true at least. You can travel separately or with us, whichever makes more sense." "I will travel separately but parallel," Thomas said. "That way, if anyone does spot you, I can come in from another direction and provide backup." They spent the rest of the day preparing for the journey. Bennett loaded saddlebags with supplies and made arrangements for a neighbor to check on the ranch and feed the animals while they were gone. Priscilla carefully packed the few belongings she had, along with the blue dress from their wedding day. That evening, as they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, Priscilla leaned her head on Bennett's shoulder and sighed. "What is on your mind?" Bennett asked, wrapping his arm around her. "I was just thinking about how much my life has changed in such a short time. A month ago, I was alone in Delta, going through the motions of living but not really feeling alive. Now I am married to a wonderful man, planning a dangerous journey to bring down a criminal empire, and somehow feeling more hopeful about the future than I have in years." "You are braver than you give yourself credit for," Bennett said. "Most people would have fallen apart under this kind of pressure, but you have faced everything with strength and grace. I do not feel very brave most of the time. Mostly I feel scared and uncertain. Being brave does not mean you are not scared. It means you keep going even when you are terrified." He turned to look at her, his blue eyes intense in the fading light. "And Priscilla, you need to know that no matter what happens on this trip, no matter what we find or do not find in Savannah, you are stuck with me. We are in this together for better or worse. We did promise that just last week," Priscilla said with a small smile. For better or worse, in sickness and in health, until death do us part. Exactly. And I intend to make good on every word of those vows. They left at first light, with Thomas riding out an hour ahead of them to scout the trail. Bennett and Priscilla traveled slowly, sticking to lesser-known paths and avoiding any settlements large enough to have a sheriff or a telegraph office where word of Murphy's reward might have spread. The journey to Savannah would take at least 2 weeks, possibly longer if they encountered obstacles. They had decided to carry camping supplies and sleep under the stars most nights, rather than risk staying in boarding houses where they might be recognized or remembered. The first few days passed without incident. They saw few other travelers, and those they did encounter were too focused on their own business to pay much attention to a young married couple heading east. Bennett proved to be excellent company on the trail, pointing out interesting plants and animals, telling stories about his childhood, and making Priscilla laugh with his dry observations about the world around them. At night, they would make camp in secluded spots far from the trail. Bennett would build a small fire for cooking while Priscilla tended to the horses and set up their bedrolls. After dinner, they would lie together under the stars, talking quietly about everything and nothing. Despite the danger of their situation, Priscilla found herself treasuring these moments of intimacy and connection. On the 5th day of travel, they reached a larger town called Grantville, where they needed to resupply. They had been carefully rationing their food, but they were running low on several essentials. Bennett wanted to ride through without stopping, but Thomas pointed out that a couple traveling without adequate supplies would draw more attention than one stopping briefly to purchase necessities. "I will go in alone," Thomas offered. "You two can wait outside of town. Give me a list of what you need and I will be in and out as fast as possible." But Bennett shook his head. "If Murphy has spread word of the reward this far, people will remember a young man asking specific questions about supplies for more than one person. It is better if Priscilla and I go in together, just another couple passing through." They agreed that Thomas would wait with the horses in a grove of trees about a mile outside of town, while Bennett and Priscilla rode in together. They would stick to their story. They were traveling to Savannah, where Bennett had a job offer at a shipping company, and Priscilla was his new bride accompanying him to their new life. Grantville was larger than Delta, but not quite a city. It had a main street with various shops, a hotel, a bank, and what looked like a reasonably active commercial district. Bennett and Priscilla tied their horses outside the general store and went in together, playing their roles perfectly. Inside, they moved through the store quickly and efficiently, gathering flour, coffee, dried beans, and other staples. The shopkeeper, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes, watched them with the casual interest of someone looking for good gossip. "You folks just passing through?" she asked as Bennett paid for their purchases. "Yes, madam," Bennett replied politely. "Heading to Savannah. I have a job waiting there at the docks. Long way to travel. You must be excited about the new opportunity." "We are," Priscilla said, forcing herself to sound enthusiastic rather than nervous. "It will be nice to settle down and start our life together." The shopkeeper smiled. "Newlyweds, are you? How sweet. You picked a good one, dear," she said to Priscilla, nodding toward Bennett. "He has honest eyes." They were almost to the door, their supplies packed and ready to go, when a man walked in. He was tall and lean, wearing a black coat despite the warm weather, and he had a look about him that immediately set Priscilla on edge. She recognized him from that night in Delta. He was one of the 3 men who had been standing over Deputy Henderson's body. Priscilla's hand tightened involuntarily on Bennett's arm, and she saw his eyes flick toward the man, and then widen slightly in recognition. Bennett must have seen wanted posters or heard descriptions because he clearly knew this was trouble. "We should get going," Bennett said casually, guiding Priscilla toward the door. "Thank you for your help, madam." But the man in the black coat stepped directly into their path, his eyes fixed on Priscilla's face. "Excuse me, miss, but you look awful familiar. Have we met before?" "I do not believe so," Priscilla said, trying to keep her voice steady. "We are from over near Augusta." "I doubt our paths have crossed." The man's eyes narrowed. "You sure about that? Because you really do look like someone I have been looking for, someone who went missing from Delta a few weeks back." "I think you have me confused with someone else," Priscilla said, but she could hear the tremor in her voice. Bennett stepped slightly in front of her, his body language protective but not aggressive. "My wife has never been to Delta, sir. Now, if you will excuse us, we need to be on our way." The man did not move. Instead, he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. Priscilla's heart sank as she realized it was one of Murphy's wanted posters. The man unfolded it slowly, deliberately, and held it up next to Priscilla's face. "The resemblance is remarkable," he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. "Same eyes, same hair, same general build. The poster says there is a $500 reward for information. That is a lot of money." "That is not my wife," Bennett said firmly. "And we do not appreciate being harassed. Now step aside." The tension in the store had risen dramatically. The shopkeeper was watching with wide eyes, and Priscilla could see other customers starting to take notice of the confrontation. This could go very bad very quickly. "Tell you what," the man in the black coat said. "Why do we not just go talk to the sheriff? Let him sort out whether this is the missing woman or not. If it is not, you will be on your way with my apologies. But if it is, well then I will be $500 richer." "We are not going anywhere with you," Bennett said, his hand moving casually toward his hip where Priscilla knew he kept a concealed pistol. "We have done nothing wrong, and we have no reason to submit to interrogation by some stranger." The man's hand also moved toward his coat, and Priscilla realized with horror that they were seconds away from a gunfight in the middle of this store. She had to do something. "Wait," she said loudly, stepping around Bennett despite his attempt to keep her behind him. "You want to know if I am Priscilla Morgan from Delta. I am not. But I know who you are. You are Marcus Denton, one of Murphy Morrison's enforcers, and that poster you are holding. It is not about a missing woman. It is about silencing a witness to a murder you committed." The shopkeeper gasped, and the other customers in the store began backing toward the door. Marcus Denton's face went still and dangerous. "You are making some serious accusations, lady. Accusations that could get you into a lot of trouble." "I am not making accusations. I am stating facts. And unless you want everyone in this store to know that Murphy Morrison is hunting me, because I saw you and your associates kill Deputy Robert Henderson in cold blood, I suggest you step aside and let us leave." It was a desperate gamble, calling him out publicly. But Priscilla knew that Murphy's power relied on fear and secrecy. Bringing his crimes into the open, even in a small way, might make Denton think twice about creating a scene. For a long moment, no one moved. Then Denton slowly folded the poster and put it back in his pocket. "You are making a big mistake," he said quietly. "Murphy has a long reach. You cannot run forever." "We are not running," Bennett said. "We are traveling to our new home. Now get out of our way." This time, Denton stepped aside. Bennett and Priscilla moved quickly past him and out the door. They could feel his eyes on their backs as they loaded their supplies onto their horse and mounted up. Priscilla's hands were shaking so badly that Bennett had to help her get her foot in the stirrup. They rode out of Grantville at a steady pace, fast enough to put distance between themselves and Denton, but not so fast as to attract additional attention. Neither of them spoke until they were well outside of town and approaching the grove where Thomas was waiting. "That was terrifying and brilliant and incredibly risky all at the same time," Bennett finally said. "How did you know who he was?" "I did not for certain until I said his name and he did not correct me," Priscilla admitted. "But I remembered his face from that night. And I figured that if we were going to get out of there without a gunfight, we needed to change the dynamic, make him the one who had something to lose instead of us. Well, it worked, but now he knows for certain that you are alive and heading east. He's going to send word to Murphy." "I know. Which means we need to move faster and be more careful." Thomas was waiting in the grove as planned, and his face went pale when they told him what had happened. "We should abandon the trip to Savannah," he said immediately. "Get Priscilla somewhere safe and forget about finding those documents." "No," Priscilla said firmly. "We are not giving up now. Those documents are the only way to stop Murphy permanently. Without them, I will spend the rest of my life running and hiding. I want my life back. I want to be able to go home with my husband and build a future without constantly looking over my shoulder." "She is right," Bennett agreed. "We are closer to Savannah than we are to home, and besides, going back now would not solve anything. We move forward, but carefully." They altered their route, taking even more obscure trails and avoiding any settlements where they might be spotted. Thomas now rode closer to them rather than scouting ahead, figuring that 3 people traveling together could defend themselves better than 2 if they ran into trouble. The landscape gradually changed as they moved farther east, from the rolling hills and pine forests of interior Georgia to the flatter, more humid terrain near the coast. Spanish moss draped from trees, and the air grew thick with moisture. They saw alligators sunning themselves on riverbanks and heard the calls of birds they could not identify. 2 weeks after leaving Bennett's ranch, they finally reached the outskirts of Savannah. The city was larger than any place Priscilla had ever been, with grand houses, paved streets, and more people than she had imagined could live in one place. It was both exciting and overwhelming. "Robert Henderson's sister is named Catherine," Bennett reminded them as they found a small boarding house on the edge of the city where they could stay without drawing too much attention. "According to the records I found, she lives on Whitaker Street and works as a seamstress." Finding Catherine Henderson proved easier than they expected. The landlady at their boarding house knew exactly who they were talking about and gave them directions to a modest house in a quiet neighborhood. Catherine answered the door herself, a woman in her early 30s with the same honest, open face her brother had possessed. "Can I help you?" she asked, looking at the 3 strangers on her doorstep with understandable caution. "Miss Henderson, my name is Bennett Fletcher and this is my wife Priscilla. This is our friend Thomas Parker. We are from Delta and we need to talk to you about your brother Robert." Catherine's face immediately clouded with grief and suspicion. "What about Robert? He is dead." "Killed in a bar fight, according to the telegram I received from the marshal in Delta." "That is not what happened," Priscilla said gently. "Miss Henderson, may we come in? What we have to tell you is sensitive and should not be discussed on the street." Catherine hesitated, then nodded and stepped back to let them enter. Her home was small but neat, with fabric samples and sewing supplies organized on a large work table. She offered them seats and then sat down herself, her hands folded tightly in her lap. "Tell me what really happened to Robert," she said, her voice steady despite the pain in her eyes. Priscilla took a deep breath and told the story. She explained what she had seen that night in Delta, how Robert had been murdered by Murphy Morrison's men with the marshal's knowledge. She described fleeing for her life, meeting Bennett and going into hiding. Through it all, Catherine listened in silence, tears streaming down her face. "I knew it," Catherine finally whispered. "I knew something was wrong with the story they told me. Robert was not a drinker. He would never get into a bar fight. But I had no proof, no way to challenge their version of events." "Your brother was investigating land fraud and cattle rustling," Bennett said. "He had found documents proving Murphy Morrison was using forged papers to steal land from small ranchers." "Do you know if he sent you anything? Papers, evidence, anything that might help us prove what Morrison has been doing?" Catherine stood abruptly and walked to a trunk in the corner of the room. She opened it and pulled out a thick envelope. "This came about a week before I got the telegram about Robert's death. There was no return address, but I knew his handwriting on the envelope. Inside was a letter and a stack of legal documents." She brought the envelope back to the table and opened it carefully. "Robert wrote that if anything happened to him, I should take these documents to the federal authorities. He said they were evidence of a criminal conspiracy involving land fraud, theft, and possibly murder. He said I should trust no one in Delta because the corruption went all the way to the top." Priscilla's heart was racing. "Did you take them to the authorities?" "I tried. I went to the police here in Savannah, but they said it was outside their jurisdiction. They told me to take it to the territorial marshal's office, but I was scared. Scared that whoever killed Robert might come after me if they knew I had these documents. So I have been sitting on them, trying to figure out what to do." "May we see them?" Bennett asked. Catherine spread the documents out on the table. There were land deeds, purchase agreements, and correspondence between Murphy Morrison and various associates. But more importantly, there were the original deeds alongside the forged ones, showing clearly how properties had been transferred through fraudulent means. Robert Henderson had done meticulous work, building an airtight case. "This is exactly what we need," Thomas said, looking through the papers with growing excitement. "With these documents and Priscilla's eyewitness testimony about the murder, we can bring down Murphy and everyone working with him." "But who do we take it to?" Priscilla asked. "The territorial authorities might be compromised too." "We go over their heads," Bennett said. "We take it directly to the federal marshals or even to the courts in Atlanta. Once this becomes federal jurisdiction, Murphy will not be able to use his local connections to make it go away." Catherine looked at them with a mixture of hope and fear. "Will this finally get justice for Robert? Will the people who killed him go to prison?" "Yes," Priscilla said firmly. "I saw what happened. I can identify the men. Combined with these documents, we have everything we need to make sure the truth comes out." "Then take them," Catherine said, gathering up the papers and putting them back in the envelope. "Take them and do what Robert could not do. Bring these criminals to justice." They stayed in Savannah for 2 more days while Bennett made arrangements to meet with federal authorities. He sent a telegram to a federal marshal he knew by reputation, a man named James Crawford, who had a reputation for being incorruptible. Crawford responded quickly, agreeing to meet them in Atlanta in 1 week's time. The journey to Atlanta should have felt triumphant. They had the evidence they needed, they had a federal marshal willing to listen, and they were finally on the path to ending Murphy Morrison's reign of terror. But Priscilla could not shake the feeling that something was wrong. They were 2 days out of Savannah when her fears proved justified. They had stopped for the night in a clearing beside a stream, setting up camp as they had done dozens of times before. Bennett was tending to the fire while Thomas checked on the horses and Priscilla laid out the bedrolls. The sun was just setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The attack came without warning. 5 men on horseback exploded into the clearing, guns drawn. Bennett reached for his rifle but froze when one of the men aimed directly at Priscilla's head. "I would not do that if I were you, Fletcher," a familiar voice said. Marcus Denton rode forward on a black horse, a cruel smile on his face. "We have been tracking you for days, waiting for the right moment. I figured you would feel safe this far from Delta. I figured you would get sloppy." "What do you want?" Bennett asked, his voice level despite the guns pointed at them. "I want what you took from Catherine Henderson's house in Savannah. I want those documents, and I want the woman who witnessed something she should not have seen." "We do not have any documents," Priscilla lied. The papers were in Bennett's saddlebag, carefully wrapped in oilcloth to protect them from moisture. If Denton found them, everything they had worked for would be lost. Denton laughed. "Please, you think I am stupid. You went to Savannah for a reason. You met with Henderson's sister. You took something from her house. Now hand it over, or I start shooting people." Thomas made a sudden move toward his gun, and one of Denton's men fired. The bullet caught Thomas in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. Priscilla screamed and tried to run to him, but another of Denton's men grabbed her roughly by the arm. "The documents," Denton repeated, his gun now pointed at Bennett. "Last chance." Bennett's eyes met Priscilla's across the clearing, and in that moment she saw him make a decision. He slowly reached for his saddlebag and pulled out the wrapped package containing Robert Henderson's evidence. "Let them go," Bennett said. "You get what you came for, and you let my wife and our friend go free." "You are in no position to negotiate," Denton said. But he gestured for one of his men to take the package from Bennett. The man unwrapped it far enough to verify that it contained what they were looking for, then nodded to Denton. "Good," Denton said. "Now, about letting you go. Here is the problem with that plan. The woman can identify me and my associates. She can testify that she saw us at the scene of Henderson's death. Even without the documents, she is a loose end that needs to be tied up." He raised his gun, pointing it directly at Priscilla's chest. Time seemed to slow down. Priscilla saw Bennett start to move, saw Thomas struggling to his feet despite his wounded shoulder, saw Denton's finger begin to tighten on the trigger. The gunshot echoed through the clearing, but Priscilla was not hit. Instead, one of Denton's men dropped from his horse, a red stain spreading across his chest. A second shot followed immediately, taking down another of Denton's men. Chaos erupted. More gunshots came from the tree line, and Priscilla realized that someone else was in the forest, someone who was shooting at Denton and his gang. Bennett used the distraction to tackle Denton from his horse, and the two men rolled across the ground, fighting for control of Denton's gun. Thomas, despite his injury, drew his pistol and fired at the remaining two gang members. One went down immediately, while the other wheeled his horse around and fled into the darkening forest. The shooting from the tree line stopped, and several men emerged on horseback. Priscilla's heart leaped when she saw the federal marshal's badge on the lead rider's chest. "Federal Marshal James Crawford," the man announced. "Everyone put your weapons down now." Bennett released Denton and stepped back, his hands raised. Thomas lowered his gun. Denton tried to make a run for it, but two of Crawford's deputies tackled him before he made it 3 steps. Marshal Crawford dismounted and walked over to where Priscilla stood, still shaking from the adrenaline. "Mrs. Fletcher, your husband's telegram mentioned you might be in danger. Looks like we got here just in time. How did you find us?" Priscilla managed to ask. "We have been investigating Murphy Morrison for months," Crawford explained. "When your husband contacted me about having evidence related to the case, I knew Morrison would try to stop you from reaching Atlanta. I had my men watching the roads and trails. We picked up your trail this morning and have been following at a distance, just in case." Bennett came over and pulled Priscilla into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "It is over," he whispered. "It is finally over." Marshall Crawford retrieved the package of documents from where Denton had dropped it during the fight. "Is this the evidence you mentioned?" "Yes, sir," Bennett said. "Documents proving that Murphy Morrison and his associates have been using land fraud to steal property from citizens across the county, and my wife can provide eyewitness testimony to murder." "Then I suggest we all head to Atlanta together," Crawford said. "We will get your friend's shoulder patched up, take full statements from everyone, and start building our case. By this time next month, Murphy Morrison will be standing in front of a federal judge. Thomas's wound was not as serious as it had first appeared. The bullet had passed through the fleshy part of his shoulder without hitting bone. One of Crawford's deputies, who had served as a medic during the war, cleaned and bandaged it properly. Thomas was pale from blood loss, but insisted he could ride. They reached Atlanta 3 days later, traveling under the protection of Marshall Crawford and his deputies. The city was even larger than Savannah, bustling with commerce and activity. Crawford took them directly to the federal courthouse, where Priscilla spent hours giving her testimony to a federal prosecutor. She described in detail what she had seen the night of Deputy Henderson's murder. She identified Marcus Denton from a collection of photographs. She explained how she had fled and how Bennett had protected her. The prosecutor listened carefully, taking detailed notes and asking clarifying questions. Meanwhile, Bennett worked with other federal officials to explain the land fraud scheme documented in Robert Henderson's papers. The case against Murphy Morrison and his organization grew stronger with each passing hour. "We will be issuing arrest warrants for Murphy Morrison, Marshall Cooper, and 17 other individuals associated with the land fraud and murder conspiracy," the prosecutor told them at the end of the second day. "Federal marshals will execute those warrants within the week. And we will need you both to return for the trial, which will likely happen in about 3 months. "Can we go home?" Priscilla asked. "Back to the ranch?" "Yes, you should be safe now. Morrison will know by now that you have made your testimony and provided evidence. Silencing you at this point would not stop the prosecution. If anything, it would only make things worse for him. But I am going to assign a deputy to stay in the area near your ranch, just as a precaution." The journey back to the ranch felt different from any of their previous travels. There was no fear, no constantly looking over their shoulders. They were free. Thomas accompanied them, his arm in a sling but otherwise recovered. Catherine Henderson had decided to come with them as well, wanting to see the place where her brother had worked and to thank them in person for getting justice for him. When they finally rode up the path to Bennett's ranch, Priscilla felt tears spring to her eyes. It was home. Not just a place to hide, but truly home. The house looked exactly as they had left it, and the neighbor who had been caring for the animals had done an excellent job. Over the next few weeks, life gradually returned to a new kind of normal. Word spread through the county that Murphy Morrison and his associates had been arrested. The scope of their criminal enterprise shocked even those who had suspected corruption. Dozens of families who had lost their land to fraud would now have the chance to reclaim it. Priscilla reopened her apothecary, this time setting up a small shop in the front room of the ranch house rather than returning to Delta. People came from miles around, grateful to have an apothecary nearby and curious to meet the woman who had brought down the Morrison Gang. 3 months later, Bennett and Priscilla returned to Atlanta for the trial. Priscilla testified publicly about what she had seen, and her testimony was powerful and damning. Marcus Denton and 2 other gang members were convicted of first-degree murder. Murphy Morrison was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder, land fraud, and a dozen other charges. Marshall Cooper was convicted of corruption and obstruction of justice. Murphy Morrison was sentenced to life in prison. Several of his associates, including Denton, were sentenced to hang. Marshall Cooper received 20 years. The verdicts brought a sense of closure to the entire region that had lived under Morrison's shadow for so long. Catherine Henderson stood with Priscilla and Bennett as the verdicts were read. "Robert can rest now," she said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "Justice has been served." Life on the ranch flourished. Bennett expanded his herd with the help of Thomas, who had decided to come work as a full-time ranch hand. Catherine stayed in the area as well, opening a successful dressmaking business in a nearby town and becoming one of Priscilla's closest friends. A year after the trial, Priscilla discovered she was pregnant. Bennett was overjoyed, immediately beginning plans to expand the house to include a proper nursery. He doted on Priscilla throughout her pregnancy, treating her like spun glass even though she insisted she was perfectly capable of continuing her normal activities. Their son was born on a warm spring morning in 1885. They named him Robert Henderson Fletcher, in honor of the man whose investigation had ultimately brought down a criminal empire. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's dark hair, and from his first moments, he was the center of their world. 2 years later, a daughter arrived. They named her Catherine Marie Fletcher, and she had her father's temperament, calm and thoughtful even as a baby. The house that had once been a lonely bachelor's home was now filled with the sounds of children laughing, of family meals, of life being lived fully and joyfully. Thomas eventually married a kind woman from the next county over, and they built a house on a corner of Bennett's property. The two families became inseparable, their children growing up together like cousins. Catherine Henderson married a banker from Savannah but visited often, becoming Aunt Catherine to the Fletcher children. On quiet evenings, when the children were asleep and the ranch was peaceful, Bennett and Priscilla would sit together on their porch, the same porch where they had shared their first real conversation all those years ago. They would talk about the day's events, make plans for the future, and marvel at how much their lives had changed since that fateful night in Delta when Priscilla had whispered her desperate plea for help. "You ever think about what would have happened if I had not been in that alley that night?" Bennett asked one evening, his arm around Priscilla's shoulders as they watched the sun set over the hills. "I try not to," Priscilla admitted, "but I know I was lucky. Lucky that you were there. Lucky that you were the kind of man who would help a stranger in trouble. Lucky that you kept my secret and kept me safe." "I was the lucky one," Bennett said. "You walked into my life and reminded me what it meant to truly live. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving day to day. You made this house a home." "We made it a home," Priscilla corrected. "Together." Inside the house, they heard the sound of little Robert calling for water and Catherine starting to fuss. Priscilla stood, but Bennett pulled her back for a quick kiss. "I love you," he said, "more than I could ever put into words." "I love you too," Priscilla replied, "always and forever." As she went inside to tend to their children, Priscilla reflected on the journey that had brought her here. She had witnessed a terrible crime and lost everything she thought she had. But in running for her life, she had found something far more valuable. She had found a partner who treated her as an equal, who valued her strength and intelligence. She had found a home built on trust and mutual respect. She had found a love that had been tested by danger and uncertainty, but had emerged stronger for it. The secret she had whispered to Bennett that night in the alley had been a secret of murder and corruption. But he had kept it safe, just as he had kept her safe. And in doing so, he had earned not just her trust but her heart. Years passed in contentment. The ranch prospered, growing from a modest operation to one of the most successful in the county. Priscilla's reputation as a skilled healer spread far and wide, and people came from distant towns to purchase her remedies and seek her advice. Bennett became known as a fair and honest businessman, someone whose word was as good as any contract. Their children grew strong and healthy. Robert showed an early aptitude for working with animals, spending hours with his father learning the ranch business. Catherine was curious and bright, constantly asking questions and reading every book she could get her hands on. 2 more children followed, twin boys they named Samuel and Joseph, who brought even more joy and chaos to the household. Thomas and his wife had children of their own, and the 2 families remained close. Summer evenings often found both families gathered for dinners that stretched late into the night, filled with laughter and storytelling. The children would run wild in the fields while the adults talked about everything from politics to weather to the small dramas of ranch life. Catherine Henderson visited at least twice a year, bringing gifts for the children and news from Savannah. She never remarried after losing her husband to yellow fever, but she seemed content with her life, pouring her energy into her business and her friendships. She always said that the Fletcher family was her family too, and they treated her as such. As the children grew older, Priscilla and Bennett made sure they understood the story of how their parents had met. They did not shield them from the truth of the danger their mother had faced or the courage it had taken for both their parents to stand up against corruption. They wanted their children to understand that doing the right thing was sometimes difficult and dangerous, but it was always worth it. Robert, their eldest, took the lessons to heart. When he came of age, he decided to pursue a career in law enforcement, determined to fight injustice as Deputy Henderson had tried to do. Bennett was worried at first, remembering too well what had happened to Henderson. But Priscilla supported their son's choice, knowing that the world needed more good men willing to stand against corruption. Catherine, their daughter, became a doctor. It was an unusual choice for a woman in that era, but she was determined and brilliant, eventually attending medical school in Atlanta. Priscilla's work as an apothecary had inspired her, but Catherine wanted to do more, to have the education and credentials to practice medicine at the highest level. The twins followed more traditional paths, one taking over the ranch business with Bennett, while the other became a teacher in the local school. All 4 children grew into adults their parents could be proud of, carrying forward the values of integrity, courage, and compassion they had been raised with. On their 20th wedding anniversary, Bennett took Priscilla back to Riverside, to the small town where they had married. The justice of the peace had long since retired, but his wife still lived in the same house, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack. She remembered them immediately. "The couple who came in such a hurry," she said with a smile. "I always wondered what became of you. Whether that love I saw in your eyes was real or just the heat of the moment." "It was real," Bennett said, his arm around Priscilla. "More real than anything else in my life." They spent the night in the same boarding house where they had stayed on their wedding night. The room was unchanged, and lying together in the dark, they talked about the years that had passed and the future that still stretched before them. "You have any regrets?" Priscilla asked. "About that night in Delta, about taking me in and protecting me?" "Your life would have been simpler if you had just stayed out of it." "Simpler, maybe," Bennett said, "but not better, never better. You are the best thing that ever happened to me, Priscilla. Every day with you is a gift, even the hard days. Especially the hard days, because they remind me how strong we are together." "I feel the same way," Priscilla said. "I walked into that alley terrified and alone. I walked out as part of a team. And every day since, You have proven that I was right to trust you with my secret and my heart." They made love that night with the tenderness and passion of people who had spent 2 decades learning every detail of how to please each other. Afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, they slept peacefully, secure in the knowledge that they had built something lasting and true. The years continued to pass. Bennett's hair turned silver at the temples, and Priscilla found laugh lines crinkling around her eyes. But they grew older together, facing each challenge as a united front. They celebrated the marriages of their children and welcomed grandchildren who filled the ranch house with noise and energy. Thomas and his wife remained close neighbors and dear friends. Catherine Henderson eventually moved to a house on the Fletcher property, preferring to spend her final years close to the family she loved. She became Grandmother Catherine to all the Fletcher grandchildren, teaching them to sew and telling them stories about their Uncle Robert Henderson, the hero who had given his life to fight corruption. On a warm summer evening when Bennett was in his 60s, he and Priscilla sat on their porch as they had done countless times before. Their eldest grandchild, Robert's son Ben, was staying with them for the summer, learning the ranch business just as his father and grandfather had before him. "Grandpa," young Ben asked, coming to sit on the porch steps, "is it true that Grandma was running from bad guys when you met her?" Bennett and Priscilla exchanged smiles. "It is true," Bennett said. "Your grandmother was very brave. She saw something wrong and she did not stay silent about it, even though it put her in danger." "And you saved her?" Ben asked, his eyes wide with the drama of it. "We saved each other," Priscilla corrected gently. "Your grandfather gave me shelter and protection when I needed it most. But I like to think I gave him something too. I gave him a reason to open his heart again after years of living alone." "That is so romantic," Ben said, in the way of young people who are just beginning to understand what love really means. "It was not romantic at first," Bennett said with a laugh. "It was terrifying and complicated and messy. But yes, eventually it became romantic. The best romances often start that way, you know, not with easy circumstances, but with two people choosing to face hard circumstances together." Young Ben thought about that for a moment. "I want to find a love like that someday." "You will," Priscilla assured him. "Just remember that the best partner is someone who makes you braver and better, someone who you would trust with your deepest secrets and your most vulnerable moments. That is what your grandfather was for me, and what I hope I have been for him." "You have been," Bennett said softly, taking her hand. "Every single day." As the sun set over the hills, painting the sky in familiar shades of gold and purple, Priscilla felt a deep sense of contentment. Her life had not turned out anything like she had expected when she was a young woman running her parents' apothecary in Delta. It had been harder in many ways, but also infinitely richer. She had witnessed terrible things and been forced to make impossible choices. But those experiences had led her to Bennett, and together they had built a life worth living. They had raised children who were making the world better. They had created a home where love and laughter flourished. They had proven that even when darkness threatens to overwhelm, choosing courage and compassion can lead to light. The secret she had whispered to Bennett all those years ago in that dark alley was no longer a secret. It had become testimony that brought criminals to justice. It had become a story passed down through generations about the importance of speaking truth, even in the face of danger. It had become the foundation of a love story that would be told and retold in the Fletcher family for years to come. Bennett had kept her secret safe, just as he had promised. But more than that, he had kept her heart safe, cherishing it every day of their marriage. And she had done the same for him, giving him the family and love he had lost when his father died. As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Priscilla leaned her head on Bennett's shoulder, feeling the steady rhythm of his breathing. This was home. Not just the ranch, not just the house, but this moment, this connection, this love that had started in desperate circumstances and grown into something unshakable. "I love you," she whispered, the same words she had spoken thousands of times over the years. "I love you too," Bennett replied, his arm tightening around her. "From that first night until my last breath, I love you." Young Ben had wandered off to do evening chores, leaving them alone in the peaceful twilight. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family. Grandchildren playing, their daughter-in-law preparing supper, the comfortable domestic rhythms of a life well lived. Years later, when Bennett and Priscilla were both in their 70s, they hosted a massive celebration for their 50th wedding anniversary. All four of their children came, along with their spouses and children, and even a few great-grandchildren. Thomas was there with his family, still spry and active despite his age. Friends came from across the county and beyond to honor a couple who had become legendary in their community. During the celebration, each of their children stood up to speak about what their parents' love had meant to them. They talked about the example of partnership and mutual respect they had witnessed growing up. They spoke of how their parents had taught them that real love was not just about romance, but about standing together through adversity. Robert, their eldest, told the full story of how his parents had met, holding nothing back about the danger and the drama. The younger grandchildren listened with rapt attention, having never heard all the details before. When he finished, there was not a dry eye in the room. "My parents' story could have ended in tragedy," Robert concluded. "But because they chose courage over fear, because they chose to trust each other and fight for what was right, it became a love story for the ages. They showed all of us that doing the right thing matters. That standing up for justice matters. And that love, real love, can flourish even in the darkest circumstances." Bennett and Priscilla stood together at the front of the room, their hands clasped, tears running down both their faces. They had lived a good life, a full life, and seeing the legacy they had created gathered in this room filled them with overwhelming gratitude. "I want to thank everyone for coming," Bennett said, when it was his turn to speak. 50 years ago, I was a lonely man living on a small ranch, going through the motions of life without really living. Then one night, a brave woman asked me for help, and I made the best decision of my life. I said yes. Everything good in my life has flowed from that single decision to help a stranger in need." He turned to Priscilla, his eyes still as blue as they had been that first night, though now surrounded by wrinkles that spoke of a lifetime of smiles. "Priscilla, you have been my partner, my best friend, my greatest adventure. You have made me a better man. You have given me a family beyond my wildest dreams. And every single day for 50 years, you have made me glad that I was in that alley in Delta on that particular night." Priscilla stood on her toes to kiss him, and the room erupted in applause and cheers. When she spoke, her voice was strong despite her age. "Bennett Fletcher walked into my life when I had lost everything and offered me safety without asking for anything in return. He protected me when I was vulnerable. He stood beside me when we faced danger. He married me when our future was uncertain, and for 50 years, he has loved me with a constancy and devotion that still takes my breath away. I am the luckiest woman in the world." The celebration continued late into the night, with music and dancing and enough food to feed the small army of guests. Children ran wild in the fields just as Bennett and Priscilla's children had done decades before. Stories were told and retold, each generation adding their own perspective to the family history. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Bennett and Priscilla found themselves alone on the porch once more, watching the last of the carriages and wagons disappear down the road. "We did all right, did we not?" Bennett said, his arm around her shoulders in the familiar gesture that had become as natural as breathing. "We did better than all right," Priscilla replied. "We built something beautiful, not just this ranch or this family, but a life built on truth and trust and love. That is more than most people ever get." They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. Priscilla thought about the young woman she had been, terrified and alone in that Delta alley. She thought about the choice she had made to trust a stranger with her most dangerous secret. And she thought about every day since, every moment of joy and sorrow and ordinary living that had woven together to create this tapestry of a life well lived. "Thank you," she said suddenly. "I do not think I have ever properly thanked you for everything you gave up to help me. You risked your life, your ranch, everything you had built." "I did not give up anything," Bennett said firmly. "I gained everything. You were never a burden or a risk, Priscilla. You were a gift, the greatest gift I ever received." In the years that followed, Bennett and Priscilla continued to live on their ranch, though they gradually turned over more of the daily operations to their sons and grandsons. They remained active in their community, with Priscilla still making herbal remedies for neighbors and Bennett still offering advice to young ranchers starting out. When Bennett passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 78, Priscilla held his hand and told him one last time how much she loved him, how grateful she was for every moment they had shared. He smiled at her with his last breath, his blue eyes still filled with the same love they had held on the day they married. Priscilla lived for another 5 years after Bennett died, surrounded by her children and grandchildren. She never remarried, saying that she had been lucky enough to find her perfect partner once and had no desire to settle for anything less. She spent her final years writing down the full story of her life, wanting future generations to understand not just the dramatic events of how she and Bennett had met, but the quiet daily choices that had built a lasting love. When she died at the age of 81, surrounded by family and at peace, her funeral was attended by hundreds of people. The church in the nearest town was not large enough to hold everyone who wanted to pay their respects to the woman who had brought down the Morrison Gang and built a legacy of courage and integrity. She was buried next to Bennett in the small cemetery on their ranch property, under a tree they had planted together 40 years earlier. The headstone was simple but perfect. Priscilla Morgan Fletcher, beloved wife, mother, and grandmother. She spoke truth in the face of danger and found love in the darkest hour. The ranch remained in the Fletcher family for generations. The story of how Bennett and Priscilla met became a cherished family legend, told and retold at gatherings and passed down through the years. The house was expanded and modernized over time, but the original porch where they had spent so many evenings remained, a reminder of the couple who had built their life there. In the way of great love stories, theirs became larger than life over time. But those who had known them personally always insisted that no embellishment was needed. The reality of Bennett and Priscilla's love had been extraordinary enough. Two people from difficult circumstances who had chosen to face the world together, and in doing so had created something that lasted beyond their own lifetimes. The secret Priscilla had whispered to Bennett that night in the Delta Alley had been a secret of murder and corruption. But it had become something more, a testament to the power of courage, the importance of standing up for justice, and the transformative nature of love that is built on trust and mutual respect. Bennett had kept that secret safe along with her heart, and in return, she had given him a life filled with meaning and joy. Together, They had proven that even in the darkest circumstances, when two people choose to stand together, they can build something beautiful that endures long after they are gone. Their great-great-grandchildren still lived on that ranch, still told the story of the brave young woman and the cowboy who saved her. And on quiet evenings, when the wind rustled through the old tree where Bennett and Priscilla were buried, locals swore you could still feel the presence of that enduring love, a reminder that some bonds are strong enough to transcend even death itself. The Fletcher Ranch stood as a monument to what they had built together, but their true legacy was in the values they had instilled in their descendants: courage, integrity, compassion, and the unwavering belief that standing up for what is right, no matter the personal cost, is always the right choice. That love built on trust and honesty will always outlast love built on convenience or circumstance. And that sometimes, the most extraordinary stories begin with a whispered plea for help in a dark alley, and a stranger brave enough to answer that call.